Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Neo Tokyo's official podcast, Interlinked. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playable Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, playable.games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playable. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlink. It's me and Jared today for a homie episode. We got a lot to talk about in the legal world. We've got a lot to talk about in the market world. Some of the things we were talking about a couple weeks ago coming home to roost. But first and foremost, how we doing today, Jared?
Doing great, man. It's a Friday. Happy to be here. You guys will be watching this on the following Tuesday, and we are excited to be here.
Stoked to be here. I've been loving these homie episodes. I'm like, actually, like, I always get mixed emotions now when guests cancel. I'm like, oh, nice. Another homie episode. So, yeah, let's kick it off with some of the headlines. So maybe we dive in first to Binance winning out on that case. I think it was technically Binance.us. All charges have been dropped. What's the good word there, Jared?
Yeah, so this is just a continuation of the SEC doing what it has done since Trump's been in office of just getting rid of all the enforcement actions. I mean, this is like really the last really big enforcement action that they haven't resolved. So essentially, Binance walks away. Now, I don't know. The big question is what happens to Binance US now, because there was always that it was always the little brother. It never worked quite as well. I mean, we all know if you had a VPN, you just go to the real Binance because it was just easier, better, had more options, had more coins. Believe it or not, I believe Louisiana was one of the states where I am that you couldn't access it, even though it was allowed in some U.S. states. So let's see if they revive it and what happens. But for now, SEC says you're good to go, no issues, just like Ripple and just like all the enforcement actions that have come before it.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because obviously Trump's been quite tight on China, quite tight on some like trade with Asia. And this is a little bit of a counter signal here because, they're opening up things to Binance. Obviously, they're a competitor not only to, Coinbase, a good American institution. Well, we'll see how good after they handle these hacks and such. But it's interesting that they're opening up not only competition for Coinbase and American institutions, but Truth and Liberty Fi exchange by definition is a bit of a competitor. So maybe we're seeing a little bit of ass covering to be like, no, I'm not playing too unfair. Why would I make Binance.us allowed to be a competitor for my own company? So an interesting move there, but certainly good to see. Hey, if they weren't breaking any laws, then they deserve to be able to operate, and people in the U.S. should have those options.
Yeah, and look, if they're going to drop all the other enforcement actions that they did against, crypto.com and Kraken and Coinbase, they really had to. There wasn't any choice because Binance US was doing nothing different than the other ones. The fact that, the actual Binance company in China has something to do with it could play into it, but in fact, they are allowed to be here and do the same thing that the other companies are doing. And if those enforcement actions are dropped, this one should be also.
And speaking about the little brother.us, FTX.us obviously had gained quite a bit of traction, and FTX.us and I believe FTX are issuing some refunds in stables. Obviously, that is, to my knowledge, they're paying out what those tokens were worth at the moment that they went under. So that is, I mean, better than nothing, but a tough L for anyone who was holding Bitcoin getting paid out. I think, I don't know what they marked it to, whether it was, the Pico bottom, like 16K, or like sort of that durable bottom around like 20. But obviously, that's a bit of a kick in the nuts if you could be swapping that Bitcoin for 100K right now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm sure everybody's like, please pay me in crypto because it's same thing with Mount Gox, right? I mean, you had, in Mount Gox, you had the option of doing either, and it was certainly complicated being from here and trying to, hire a Japanese attorney and getting that handled. We helped a couple clients with that, getting Japanese attorneys and sort of navigating the Mount Gox issues. But here with FTX, it's awesome that they're getting money back because the way it played out, at that point you were like, man, if I get a penny, I've won. And getting something, it is a bitter pill, but it's at least a pill you get to eat, and that it's a little better. But at the end of the day, it is very interesting to see, how high, it came, and it was, the biggest exchange. It was essentially at that point saving everyone. And we're like, oh man, another exchange is going down. Oh, don't worry. FTX is going to buy it and it's going to be fine. And then, CZ was the one, I think, that kind of broke the story on that. And then bam, just, what did Sam Bankman-Fried do? And, that sort of onion being peeled was just fascinating as it unfolded.
Yeah, and I actually saw on the FTX news that a TV show has been greenlit and cast.
Wow.
And I think I can't remember who's playing Sam Bankman-Fried, but I know one of the people getting a lead role is I'm blanking on her name, but she was in the Ozarks, the blonde, curly-haired woman. So I don't know if she's playing his number two there, but that's definitely gonna be. I'm gonna be stoked to watch it, having like sort of lived through it. I mean, that was one of my biggest. I use that as my example of like, hey, if you're in crypto, you really have to be on X because you could have got this word through Discord too if you're well connected as well. But for the average unconnected person, I had 3 or 4 days from when I started to see smoke in the FTX collapse to pull my funds out. Didn't have to sweat those withdrawals once they cleared, and was able to get all of my money out. And anybody who was trading off of news headlines, they lost everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I had never used FTX for whatever reason. I'm not even sure why I didn't. I was lucky. I mean, I had that similar situation to you with Luna. When it collapsed, I had a ton of money in there, and for just luck, I happened to unlock, because I believe at the time Luna was like 21 days you had to wait when you unlocked it. So I had just had it unlocked, and it was literally sitting there waiting to be moved off. I was probably going to do something with it. And then I saw that first sort of move, and I was like, ooh, I was thinking like, let's get back in. I wasn't thinking let's get out. And then as the day progressed, I'm like, let's get out. I probably lost like 15%, but I was like, at the end of the day, I was like, wow, I'm lucky on that one. And to get back to Sam Bankman-Fried, he recently did an interview with Tucker Carlson from jail, and I
Hmm.
believe, according to some website, it was unauthorized, and he got a stint in solitary because he did that without the permission of the warden and the guards. I watched the interview. It was in, he didn't really admit too many things, but um, he's definitely in a different mindset now than he was before. And I watched that interview, and it was kind of a fascinating interview. If you guys, either love Tucker or hate him, it's still a great interview. And, him interviewing Sam Bankman-Fried from jail is really interesting. And I found it really fascinating that he got a solitary stint for that. So,
Yeah, and I mean, also super interesting, just like the new paradigm with people who are incarcerated as the world is becoming more and more digital. I mean, we were talking about Ross Ulbricht going and like being at the Bitcoin conference in 2021 virtually. Diddy obviously just launched a meme coin from jail. So the lines of the digital world, like you might be physically incarcerated, but it seems like they've got a lot more access to the digital world, and that's obviously becoming more and more important.
yeah, and I actually get clients from certain, state jails who are allowed to text me from an iPad. And my understanding that it's secure, they can log in, and they're the only ones that can access it. I tell them not to send me too many things because perhaps the DA and the jail are actually looking at those. So, we keep it kind of light. We don't go into too many details, but at the same time, it's much more connected. And I think it was cool to see Ross, from being in jail 4 years ago and then coming back. I think it was freedom, decentralization, and unity were his big sort of overarching themes in his Bitcoin speech, which was really cool. And look, I'm of the opinion that he created a software, and obviously, some others are of that opinion as well, namely Trump, and that he shouldn't be responsible for what others did on that software. Now, I personally don't know how much involvement he had other than creating the software. That's maybe why he was incarcerated in the first place. But at a minimum, just like Tornado Cash, if you are creating a software and somebody else is using it, it's the same thing as a gun. We don't hold gun manufacturers liable for all the deaths that happen due to guns. So why would we do the same thing for a crypto software that allows somebody to either hide funds or, in that case, hire people to kill people or hire people to deliver drugs and all the bad things that was going on Silk Road?
Well, I'm definitely interested because I think I ended up with a relatively skewed opinion due to the fact that if you're not taking in multiple data sources, like, you're always getting a slanted opinion. But I think it was the first book we read for the Neo Tokyo Book Club, big shout out C's in the book club, was Tracers in the Dark. And it wasn't specifically just about Ross and the Silk Road, but it covered, child exploitation, a bunch of different like digital things like going on the dark side of the web. Um, but, that book made it sound like Ross was directly involved in hiring, some murderers to go and like maybe get some people that were like onto his lead. So it's just very tough to figure out. Obviously, all of that is alleged. I certainly don't have any details outside of, what was covered in this book, but I'm definitely interested to get the other side of the story and see, how much was this actual crimes that he was committing and how much was it, them just trying to nail him about a technology that they really didn't like.
Yeah, and look, that sort of is a really good opportunity for him to present his story, whether that's a book or podcast or a movie, a TV show. I mean, these days, why not do all of it? But I think that would be sort of a fascinating, however the media comes out, however he chooses to do it. But I think lots of people are interested in, his side of the story. And at this point, he's been pardoned, so he can come clean and say whatever he wants to about it, which is, to me, a sort of a fascinating moment to be able to, tell my story, good, bad, and ugly, and then sort of let the public decide whether I was actually guilty or not, even though technically now I'm not, even though I was for, over 10 years or almost 10 years.
Yeah, I'm certainly excited to get some more facts out of it. On the news front, I know you had a couple other things in the legal world that have been coming up. What else is going on there?
Yeah, so there's the Clarity Act of 2025, which is something that they're trying to get the CFTC instead of the SEC to handle digital assets. It's got to go through both the Senate and Congress. It's supposed to be bipartisan. I don't know what Trump's position is on it, whether he would approve it or not. But according to the bill, the CFTC would be the one that is overseeing it, and obviously a new department under that umbrella would be created. Who knows what it'll be called? I'm sure it'll be some fun acronym, and then that will handle, dealing with digital assets and, specifically stable coins. And then we also have the stable coin legislation, which is coming down the road right after it, which I think is going to be quite interesting to see how both of these work together. Obviously, when I think it'll hit the Senate, there'll be some changes. There'll be a lot of different amendments. That's always the case. And this could go on for months to even the rest of the year, maybe to into next year, trying to figure out what the outline is of this. And then really the next step is, let's say that passes, is what the CFTC is actually going to do, what these departments are going to look like, and most importantly, who's going to run them and how they're going to sort of, set it up as far as, well, here's what we're trying to do, here's the things we're trying to stop, and kind of where that goes. But that's all to be seen. But the good news is, like we've talked about many times, and something that you always drive home, which I think is an amazing point, is once we get some clarity that allows the markets to be able to feel comfortable, whatever the clarity is, as long as we have it, now the markets can say, okay, now we're dealing with this, then it gets priced in, and then it gives it time to, essentially go up because everything's sort of been decided.
Yeah, and uncertainty really is one of the biggest like drags on the market. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of Marco Popovich and his research at BCA Research. He wrote a great book on geopolitical alpha and called Geopolitical Alpha on that topic. And one of his big takeaways is that usually geopolitical events are a fade because people always assume the worst and they have to price in the worst possible situation when much more likely it's going to be somewhere in the middle. one of the best examples of that recently is if you were following some of the sensationalist headlines on the India-Pakistan incident and, I mean, conflict that was happening, like, nuclear powers, you're having to price in all of these crazy things, the Indus Valley Treaty being sort of brought back on water rights. But at the end of the day, it ended up being, I don't want to call it a nothing burger. People died, and it was obviously a huge incident to people that were there. But from a geopolitical and economic standpoint, it ended up being a clear fade. And we've seen that with, I mean, how many times has crypto nuked because of something that's gone down in Iran? And those tend to be good buying opportunities. Obviously, not financial advice. But the other thing on the big uncertainty front is we've gotten a ton more of uncertainty around tariffs, around the big, beautiful bill that have been coming down this week. And I know we were talking about that on our last show.
Yeah, and recently there was a court that ruled that those initial Liberation Day tariffs were illegal. That's obviously going to be appealed, but at the moment it looks like all of those tariffs were sort of for nothing. Now, does that mean the government has to pay them back? At this point, no, because there'll be an appeal. But it sort of brings into question that entire sort of strategy to help us with our financial situation, and if that hammer is sort of taken away, how much power would Trump have to negotiate with these countries? And it's a good point that you brought up about Iran. I mean, there's also obviously the Ukraine-Russia conflict that has certainly sent prices up and down. The same with Israel. That entire thing has brought prices up or down. And at this point, I think everything's sort of stable as far as a war front. But who knows what the next conflict would be. And, obviously the timing of that is so important. If it's sort of in a downturn and then that comes out as news next, and then maybe the tariffs get whacked, it could be sort of a perfect storm to have, a decently good dip down to, 90s, 80s, maybe. Lots of people are calling for certainly lower than that. Because we've been on this incredible uptrend since the election. Now, obviously, it's stalled for a little while, but I mean, today it's a little down. But man, the sort of amount of green days that we have seen, I think, is unprecedented in Bitcoin's history, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's been an absolutely crazy market. And you saw when that tariff news broke overnight here in the United States, you saw the knee-jerk reaction was for things to go quite bullish. Stock futures, I think the SPY hit 6,000 in the futures. Obviously, it came quite a bit down the next day, especially from that level. Saw the same thing in Bitcoin and ETH. It popped hard, and then once the markets opened and right before, it took a dive. And I think that's just pricing in how complicated this is because, yeah, on its face, no tariffs, that's bullish, just on its face. But that tariff, that tariff revenue was an important part of balancing this big, beautiful bill where they're like, don't worry, conservatives, like fiscal conservatives. I mean, there's quite a bit of rhinos in there who don't seem to give two shits about, which way the deficit is going. But for the people that do, now that 4 trillion of debt could be 5 trillion in debt, could be even higher if those sort of like tax revenues aren't balancing out all that deficit and spending. So, I mean, it's just packing in more uncertainty, as you said. I mean, I think within a 24-hour period, tariffs were off and then they were appealed and then another court came in and then that court was appealed. I mean, it was an absolute cluster. So you can imagine the market's getting whipsaw, and what it really needs is some clarity at this point.
Now a word from our sponsors.
What's up, crypto gamers? Shout out to our sponsor, Myria. Myria is revolutionizing Ethereum-based gaming with its powerful L2 scaling solution. Think zero gas fees, instant transactions, free NFT minting, and more. Myria offers a suite of tools that are tailor-built for game development, including game-specific SDKs, a spec'd-out marketplace, Web3 spiked leaderboards, new AI super tools, and more. All this fueled by a fleet of player-run nodes that are a breeze to operate and pump out daily rewards for supporting the ecosystem. Plus, check out Meta Rush, the Battle Royale obstacle runner by Myria Studios, dropping very, very soon.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Yeah, again, I think you're right. It comes just back to clarity. Like we need to have the clarity. And the like we've talked about before, Trump's the spending bill, and if we don't get that revenue in from tariffs, which I was, I still think that maybe they weren't always even thinking that that was going to happen. It was just sort of a way for them to, sort of negotiate and get something back in return and show that, he's doing what he promised in his, in all of his speeches and leading up in his campaign. But that change is going to be significant, and what does that mean as far as funding our debt? I mean, our interest payments are so high. Does that mean now we have to lower interest rates and start printing more money? I mean, to me, I don't know what the choice is other than that at this point, because we are just, I think spending is going to be, everyone says, all right, let's try to balance the budget, do these things. I don't know if it's even possible at this point. And certainly if someone like Trump, who really ran on that, is not able to do it or doesn't want to do it or whatever the case is and why it's not being done, then no one's going to do it. So, that's the point to me.
Yeah, he had about as much like cachet going in and as much good political will, at least from his party, which had the dominant position. And yeah, I mean, it seemed like Main Street had its time in the sun for, I think, 9 days. And then the bond market sort of caused him to change his tune, if that was even the real tune that he was whistling. I mean, the more now with Elon leaving, and it's hard to view this Doge sort of chapter as anything else but kabuki theater, as we're seeing, Congress not even supporting some of those cuts around like sort of like fraud and things like that. So, yeah, it's definitely very interesting to shift gears a little bit. Obviously, we are the official Neo Tokyo podcast, and we had some huge news coming out of Neo Tokyo, which is that AVAX and Neo Tokyo have become ecosystem partners, which I was super fired up about. I've been, the podcast has been a big fan of the AVAX ecosystem for quite a while. Obviously, Shrapnel was one of our first big sponsors. So a lot of experience working with them. And AVAX seems to be on fire. I mean, the black hole development, obviously, I work for Neo Tokyo and Super. So please take anything that I say as to be biased, because that's where I get my paycheck. And I have a huge beta, not only certainly to Neo Tokyo, but also to Super. So but very exciting to see AVAX is hitting the ground running. Lots of game developments, a lot of really big partnership ecosystems. I think the synergy between AVAX and Neo Tokyo, between Byte Street investing coming down the pipe and being able to get good deal flow and funding for things that are coming out of the AVAX ecosystem. Neo Tokyo citizens get a great benefit that, hey, we're going to make sure your grant proposals are given the proper sort of like look over, and if they're deserving, go through. So just some really, really good benefits between Neo Tokyo and AVAX, and certainly really excited to see them, not only just lean really hard into gaming, but I think what they're doing on the black hole side is really exciting as well.
Yeah, yeah. Black hole is very, very exciting. And, I've been a fan of AVAX for a long time. And, does that mean that this is sort of winning the L1 race for gaming? I've thought it was certainly in the lead for quite a while. There's lots of competitors always that come in. Ronin Chain obviously would be another one. Certainly, yeah, like Beam. There's lots of different people that are coming in and trying to do things. But AVAX really has a lot of muscle, and I've always liked it. I have, I use LFJ with Joe. Like, I do some, it's just like liquidity pool providing on there, which is always fun. And I really started getting into it more recently, and they have a good program. I'm happy to move it to Black Hole and get that going, and that's certainly very, very exciting. Another Elio and Alex project. And look, Neo Tokyo is pushing, and it's such a great community, and I can't say enough about how powerful all the people are in it, and really selfless about helping others, and sort of maximizing everyone who's in there. And there's so many projects and so many really cool people there, and I can't talk highly enough about it for sure.
Yeah, super exciting. Obviously, Interlinked, which owns the Neo Tokyo podcast and the AMA team, we've benefited enormously from Neo Tokyo, and hopefully Neo Tokyo has benefited enormously from us as well. But I mean, there's so much going on. The Syndicate, now named Rango, built by Chronicle and Ben, that's been super exciting. So there's just, if you're in Neo Tokyo, again, from a biased position, but if you're in crypto gaming, Neo Tokyo is the place to be.
Yeah, for sure. Great segue into that. And, we probably don't talk enough about it just because we're like, ooh, well, it's really us. So, how much should we talk about it? But man, whenever we do, guys, like, and S1s and S2s have been flying off the shelf. Not financial advice. Go take a look at them. Get some bites if you want to. They're out there. I think it's a good idea with all the things we have coming up.
Yeah, I mean, and if we want to look at just a historical case study, when SitCap got formally announced and the actual launch of SitCap took place, you saw bytes go from, a dollar, $2, $3, all the way up to like 24 bucks. Now, that ended up getting faded. There were issues with SitCap. There were issues with the rollout. I think having some really big deals is going to be very important. And again, I've got a shit ton of bytes. I sold a shit ton of bytes during that sort of like run up. So again, not financial advice by any means, but I think Felix, what he's building and the clout that he has, certainly in Neo Tokyo, he's a demigod in Neo Tokyo, but he's got a ton of respect what he's building in Ure and his other projects and his, the history of where, working for Twitch and all of like his good sort of resume there. I think there's a lot to be excited about. And the trust in Felix, I think, is going to be a lot higher. Now, is the supply of bytes larger at this point? Absolutely. So, you always want to make sure you're comparing market caps opposed to comparing price, which I think is like probably the first lesson people get in crypto is like, hey, these supplies are moving around. So you really got to match market caps and not token price. But I think there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, it's a good reminder. Check out the white paper, the Bytes 2.0, where you know how many are being produced every day. So, let's say the price is stable in a week. There's many more bytes that have been produced. Same thing after a year. So just keep that in mind if you guys are interested in looking at it. And I'm sure lots of the people that watch this have some and are, already know what's going on. But for those that don't, take a look. Go to the website, check out our Twitter and certainly join the Discord. And, if you are more than interested, get an S1 or an S2 and come check us out. I think we would love to have you.
Yeah, and I'm certainly one thing I'm excited about that I actually have zero inside information on. Even on the council, Firestorm's good at keeping stuff close to the vest, especially if it's stuff he's working on with the founders. But Becker alluding to something around like, a pump.fun-esque solution that he's working on with Firestorm. I'm definitely excited about getting some more details there. I know he had a tweet that sort of alluded to something like that. Again, I don't have any sort of insider information, so I'm as excited as everybody else to see what they've got cooking up. And Becker's a bit of an evil, mad scientist in a lot of ways, so I'm excited to see what he's cooking.
Yeah, and one thing is that Neo Tokyo is very good about keeping secrets for sure. So it's always like I have no idea what's going on, and maybe one day I will when it's announced. And we know typically around the same time as everyone when it gets announced publicly. So that is
Yeah.
cool, though. I love that part of it, honestly.
No, me too. I've always, been a big fan of what they've been cooking up and, a lot to be excited about. One interesting thing, kind of this connects to the AVAX partnership announcement. We had a Spaces that unfortunately got dropped a couple of times from X issues. So I think that's an interesting factor. I saw a great sort of meme talking about how all of this decentralized infrastructure is still sitting upon X for most of our communications. And for the last week, at least X has been having some terrible, terrible issues. So it's just interesting to be like, okay, when you have these uncertainty moments coming out of the market, and then you have X down, how much does that cause extra reactions in the crypto market?
Yeah, look, X has gotta. I mean, that's the biggest sort of detractor about X is its stability when you're getting on spaces, and especially if you have spaces with lots of people, it's always glitchy. Someone gets rugged almost every time when it's large, and you're on and you can talk, but you can't hear, or vice versa, and it's very frustrating. Is there a competitor coming out? Is someone building that? I mean, I would look if it's more stable. I mean, you gotta Elon's got to either fix it or we go somewhere else. I think, and you're right. I mean, between X and Discord, I mean that's and Telegram, that's likely like 99% of the communication in crypto between those three platforms, and all of them could certainly have issues, and all of them at any point the SEC pulling the Telegram token a long time ago before it went out and became ton. I mean, there's always issues there. And so, we need a spot that we can land and feel safe. And again, once that happens, clarity, and then whatever program or whatever platform it is that provides that, whether X gets fixed or whatever, then I think that will sort of make the case for that particular platform to go up in price. And hey, because look, it's housing all of the crypto communications, and we want it here. We love X, but Elon, fix the spaces, man.
And you imagine, like, especially like whether the spaces get the love that they deserve or not, the actual platform, he's building so many of his big swings into it. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I feel safe in guessing that most people access Grok through the Twitter main page or the Twitter app and don't download it individually. I use Grok regularly, and I'm certainly in that camp. And obviously, there's been a lot of speculation to him adding payment rails. I think there were like companies formed that sort of alluded to that, and him getting the licensing to be able to do that. But if you're going to have a payment rail inside of that, and people are going to be probably at first just sending each other, but as now so many people, if you look at Venmo, pay rent, pay vendors inside of Venmo, like you need that payment rail to be up all of the time if you're going to get any sort of buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to me, it's like there's no other better sort of place to do all of this. So the fact that it's glitchy is just so frustrating when it's like, man, we want to support you. We want to do it here. We love it, but it's got to be fixed. And, Grok, I agree. I haven't downloaded the app, but I do use it, and it's from inside of X. And I love some of the features. Speaking of AI, I had a 45-minute conversation while driving the other day with ChatGPT in the car about law, and it was fascinating.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. I mean, it's just such an important tool, and you can really see it. I mean, my dad uses it, like his generation getting into it. Like it's really cool to see the adoption, and just, I mean, the amount of leverage for preparing for podcasts and AMAs, especially if you're in the crypto space where most stuff's on X, like it's cut my prep time down 80%.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, you could do so much in 5 minutes just before. It's wild. And to me, it's going, and Google needs to be careful, because I'm going, if I Google something, and my kids, more importantly, my son, we were driving in the car and he wanted to know how old LeBron was, and I'm like, I don't know exactly. He went directly to an AI and said, how old is LeBron, instead of going to Google, which 10 years ago, I mean, Google had it locked down. Now, I mean, they're certainly losing, where YouTube is one of the largest search platforms. I wonder where ChatGPT is now. I haven't seen the stats on that. It's probably the most used AI, I would imagine. And then if you add all the AIs together, like at least Claude and Grok and say ChatGPT and Gemini, where do they rank along the search engines? And my guess is they're gaining quite heavily, because I would always go there first now instead of Google every time.
Yeah, and you can see Google starting to change its tune with its like big new event. Obviously, they were showing integrating AI directly into their search platform by default. So they certainly seem to be moving in that direction. What's also interesting is, they had the big event open over at OpenAI as well, and it looks like they're going into the product space. So they're continuing to go forward. It's like speculated it could be some sort of pendant, puck, smart glasses. We'll see what sort of like form it takes. But I think we're entering the generation of AI first hardware, which is going to be super interesting to see how, I mean, my iPhone homepage now is like some of the apps are like 4 or 5 things over. Are we going to get a new sort of AI first user interface for, mobile phones and such?
Oh yeah, and look, the sort of that hardware that isn't a phone, that's a wearable. I think whoever gets that right is going to be sort of the next Apple, or the next Nvidia, whatever $1 trillion company, because many people have tried and many people have failed just because it wasn't the right, ease of use, and you look like a moron for some of the items, and it's like, but if whoever gets that right, wow, that's going to take off because that's going to be amazing. And you have it here or wherever it is, and if you can like see it from glasses, and you don't need to carry your phone all the time, and you're sort of interacting with the world while you're watching or listening to something. Fascinating. I would use that certainly all the time if it was seamless and worked as well as it could. So that is, oh, I love that idea.
Yeah, and I mean, Apple, in my opinion, is very ripe for disruption. I think there's a very good case to argue that sort of innovation died at Apple with Steve Jobs. I mean, now we're just seeing slightly thinner, slightly bigger, bigger phone. The AI on an iPhone is some of the worst available in technology currently, even with the Siri upgrade. Like it just caught it up to what felt like 2018 or something like that, but we're still far off the bleeding edge. And one of the strongest things for Apple has been its walled garden. And with AI tools becoming, more sophisticated, is that going to erode that walled garden? Because now there are tools that can actually scrape your iPhone and recreate it into an Android platform.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, to start allowing that in, because if they don't, they're going to be caught. Where it was an asset before, now I think it could be a liability when you're walled like that. And I remember in the very beginning of the first iPhone when Steve Jobs was like, "Yeah, we asked all these people what they wanted, and they said things like, oh, bigger, smaller, thinner." Nobody was thinking of an iPhone with a touch screen and a smart platform like that. He's like, they all said what they wanted, and it wasn't what they wanted. What they wanted was what I created. And I think maybe we're sort of to the max of what a phone could be, and the next sort of interrupter and something that's going to come in and really just shake up everything, maybe something that replaces a phone. And that's really sort of the thing I was thinking the other day. It's like, why does it have to be a phone? Why can't it be something else? Because that's really what the iPhone did. I know we had flip phones, but to me this is more like a tablet, and it's just a little smaller, and it's a completely different product. But that is, I think, sort of the next iteration of whatever that's going to be. That's going to be amazing.
Yeah, a lot to be excited about coming down the pipe. Jared, anything left on your end before your app?
No, not really. Hope you guys have a great week, and super glad to have a homie episode. It's always awesome.
Yeah, very grateful for your time, Jared. Another interesting episode. They're keeping it coming with all the legal news, so we'll keep having these conversations. Hopefully, everyone's enjoying them. If you've got any feedback for us and you're a Neo Tokyo citizen, hit us in the Discord. If not, hit us on the YouTube comments or any of our other platforms, and we'll always take that advice into advisement. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Interlinked Podcast, Neo Tokyo's official podcast, and we'll be back next week with another episode.
See you guys later.
Later, everybody.